Bear leads human baby to a remote forest cabin. What he finds inside was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of pine trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Jacob Bennett wiped the sweat from his brow as he checked his compass for the third time. Something wasn't right. His hunting cabin should have been just beyond the ridge to the north, but all he could see were more trees stretching endlessly in every direction. "Lily!" he called out, his voice echoing through the still air. "Lily, can you hear me?" No response came except for the distant call of a bird and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Jacob's heart pounded harder in his chest. His 4-year-old daughter had been right beside him just moments ago, gathering pine cones while he consulted his map. Now she was gone, vanished in the vast wilderness of Blackwater Forest. "Lily!" His voice cracked with desperation as he spun in circles, scanning for any sign of her bright yellow jacket among the green and brown of the forest. The fading light made it increasingly difficult to see clearly, and panic began to set in. This was supposed to be a simple afternoon hike to introduce his daughter to the family's hunting traditions, not a nightmare. Jacob pulled the radio from his backpack. "Savannah, come in. This is Jacob," he spoke urgently into the device. Static was his only answer. They were too deep in the valley for a signal to reach his wife back at their campsite. Somewhere in the distance, a twig snapped. Jacob froze, listening intently. Another crack, followed by what sounded like a soft giggle. "Lily?" he called, more softly this time, moving cautiously toward the sound. The undergrowth became thicker as he pushed through bushes and stepped over fallen logs. The giggles grew louder, punctuated by what sounded like low grunts that definitely weren't coming from a child. Jacob's blood ran cold. Bears were common in these woods. His hand instinctively moved to the hunting knife at his belt as he quickened his pace, crashing through the brush with less caution now. He burst into a small clearing and stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the center of the open space, sat Lily, her yellow jacket bright against the forest floor. She was laughing, her tiny hands reaching out to touch something that made Jacob's heart nearly stop beating. A massive brown bear, at least 7 feet tall when standing, was sitting on its haunches just feet away from his daughter. Its fur was thick and streaked with silver, suggesting advanced age. But it was the bear's eyes that struck Jacob the most. They weren't filled with predatory hunger, but seemed to hold an almost human-like intelligence as they watched Lily with what could only be described as gentle curiosity. "Lily," Jacob whispered, afraid any sudden movement might provoke the animal. "Lily, honey, don't move." The little girl turned at the sound of her father's voice, her face lighting up with excitement rather than fear. "Daddy! Look at my friend. His name is Buddy." The bear's head swiveled toward Jacob, those intelligent eyes locking onto his. Jacob expected to see aggression, territorial defense, or at least wariness. Instead, the animal seemed to be waiting, assessing. Then, to Jacob's complete disbelief, it made a soft huffing sound and nudged Lily gently with its nose, not toward Jacob, but in the opposite direction. "He wants to show me something, Daddy," Lily said with the simple certainty of a child. "He's been trying to take me somewhere." "No, honey, we need to—" Jacob started, but the words died in his throat as the bear stood up on all fours. Rather than charging or showing any aggression, it simply walked a few paces away from Lily, then turned back to look at her expectantly. When neither human moved, it repeated the action, this time letting out a low, urgent grunt. "He's worried about something, Daddy," Lily said, rising to her feet. I think we should follow him." Every instinct in Jacob's body screamed against the idea of following a wild bear anywhere, especially with his daughter in tow. But something about the animal's behavior was so utterly outside his understanding of wildlife that curiosity began to override his fear. Throughout his 36 years living in these mountains, he'd never seen anything like this. "Stay right beside me," he said firmly, stepping forward to take Lily's hand. "If I say run, you run, understand?" Lily nodded solemnly, but her eyes shone with excitement as the bear let out what sounded almost like a sigh of relief. It turned and began moving at a slow, deliberate pace through the trees, constantly looking back to ensure they were following. The forest grew darker as they walked, and Jacob pulled a flashlight from his pack. The beam caught the bear's eyes occasionally, making them shine like golden coins in the night. They moved deeper into a part of the forest Jacob had never explored, despite growing up in these mountains. The terrain became rougher, with rocky outcroppings and fallen trees creating natural obstacles that the bear navigated with practiced ease. After about 20 minutes of walking, the trees began to thin, and ahead, Jacob could make out what appeared to be a structure. As they drew closer, he realized it was a cabin, old and weathered, its wooden walls gray with age and exposure to the elements. A faint path, overgrown with weeds and barely visible in the fading light, led to its door. The bear stopped at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the cabin, sitting back on its haunches again. It made that same urgent grunting sound, nodding its massive head toward the structure. "There's a cabin, Daddy," Lily whispered, stating the obvious with childlike wonder. "Do you think someone lives there?" Jacob shook his head slowly. "I don't think so, sweetheart. It looks abandoned." The windows were dark, one of them broken, and the roof sagged dangerously on one side. This place had been forgotten by time, hidden away in this remote corner of the wilderness. Yet the bear had led them straight to it with absolute purpose. As they stood there, uncertain of what to do next, a sound drifted through the still air, faint but unmistakable. A cry, human, weak, and filled with pain. The bear's ears perked up, and it looked at Jacob with what could only be described as expectation. "Someone's hurt," Jacob said, his voice barely audible. The bear huffed in what seemed like agreement. Suddenly, the bizarre situation made a strange kind of sense. Somehow, this bear had found someone in distress and, unable to help itself, had sought out humans who could. It had found Lily, perhaps sensing that a child would be more likely to follow without fear, and then led them both here. "Stay here with Buddy," Jacob told Lily, placing her hand gently on the bear's fur before he could think better of it. To his amazement, the animal didn't react except to shift slightly closer to his daughter. "I'm going to check inside." Jacob approached the cabin cautiously, his flashlight beam dancing across the weathered wood. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as he pushed it open. The smell hit him immediately, the unmistakable scent of sickness and unwashed human. "Hello?" he called into the darkness. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" A weak moan answered him from the far corner of the single-room cabin. Jacob swept his flashlight in that direction and caught a glimpse of a figure huddled under what looked like several layers of tattered blankets. He moved closer, the floorboards protesting under his weight. The beam illuminated the face of a man, gaunt, pale, with several days' worth of beard, growth, and eyes sunken with dehydration and fever. He looked to be in his 30s, though it was hard to tell beneath the dirt and exhaustion etched into his features. "Help," the man whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, help me." "I'm Jacob," he said, kneeling beside the man and immediately assessing his condition as best he could. What happened to you? How long have you been here? Michael, the man replied weakly. Michael Hayes. I was hiking, fell, broke my leg. He gestured weakly toward his lower body, where Jacob could now see the crude splint fashioned from branches and torn clothing. Been here 5 days, I think. No phone signal, couldn't move. Jacob's mind raced. The man needed medical attention urgently. Dehydration, possible infection from the injury, exposure, all serious threats to his survival. The bear, Michael whispered, his eyes widening slightly as he looked toward the door. It's been coming, bringing me berries, water. He pointed shakily to a collection of large leaves that had been folded to hold liquid, their edges stained purple with berry juice. Jacob sat back on his heels, stunned by this revelation. The bear hadn't just found a human in distress. It had been trying to care for him, bringing food and water. And when that wasn't enough, it had sought more help. "Daddy!" Lily's voice called from outside. "Buddy says we need to hurry." Jacob almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation before the urgency of it all crashed back over him. "I'm going to get you out of here," he told Michael firmly. "My daughter and I were hiking when when your unusual friend found us. Our campsite isn't far, and my wife is there with our truck. We can get you to a hospital." Hope flickered in Michael's fevered eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "But how will you carry me?" It was a good question. Michael was tall and, despite his current weakened state, would be difficult for Jacob to carry alone over the rough terrain in the dark. "Daddy," Lily called again, more insistently this time. "Buddy wants to come in." Before Jacob could respond, he heard the heavy tread of paws on the wooden porch, and then the massive form of the bear filled the doorway. Lily stood beside it, her small hand still resting trustingly on its fur. The animal's eyes fixed on Michael, and it made a soft whining sound that seemed almost like relief. Then it looked at Jacob, and in that moment, understanding passed between man and beast in a way Jacob would never have believed possible before this night. "I think," Jacob said slowly, "he wants to help us carry you." Michael's eyes widened further. "The bear? You can't be serious." But Jacob was already considering the possibilities. With the bear's strength and his guidance, they might be able to fashion a travois, a simple sled-like stretcher, that could transport Michael safely through the forest. "Lily," Jacob said, "go outside and wait for us. I need to talk to Michael about how we're going to get him home." As his daughter slipped back outside, Jacob explained his plan to the injured man. Michael listened with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "You really think it will work?" he asked when Jacob finished. "You really think the bear will help us like that?" Jacob looked at the doorway, where the massive animal waited patiently, its breath visible in the cool night air. "I think it's already helped you more than either of us can understand," he said quietly. "And I think it's not done yet." Outside, Lily's laughter mingled with the soft huffs of the bear, a sound of innocent joy in the midst of this strange and desperate situation. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Something extraordinary was happening in these woods tonight, something that defied explanation. But he didn't have time to question it now. A man's life hung in the balance, and somehow a wild bear had chosen Jacob and his daughter to help save it. With renewed determination, Jacob set to work preparing to move Michael. Whatever strange force had brought them all together, he wasn't going to let it be in vain. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets these ancient forests might hold, and what unlikely bonds might form when survival hung in the balance. Jacob stepped outside the cabin, where Lily waited with the bear she had affectionately named Buddy. The creature's massive form was silhouetted against the deepening twilight, yet there was nothing threatening about its posture. It sat patiently, almost like a giant dog waiting for its next command. "Lily, honey, I need your help," Jacob said, kneeling to his daughter's level. "There's a very sick man inside. His name is Michael, and he hurt his leg badly. We need to get him back to Mom so we can take him to the hospital." Lily's eyes widened with concern. "Is he going to be okay, Daddy?" "I hope so, sweetheart, but we need to move fast." Jacob glanced at the bear, still marveling at the situation. "And I think Buddy here wants to help us." The bear huffed softly, as if in agreement, and stood up. Its massive shoulders reached Jacob's chest, a reminder of the raw power contained in its muscular frame. Yet it showed no aggression, only a strange, focused intent. "I need to make something to carry Michael on," Jacob explained, more to himself than to Lily or the bear. "A stretcher of some kind." He surveyed the area around the cabin, his flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. There were fallen branches that would serve as poles, and perhaps he could use his hunting jacket combined with Michael's blankets to create a surface. To Jacob's astonishment, the bear rose and moved toward a pile of debris near the side of the cabin. With surprisingly delicate movements for such a large creature, it used its paws to push aside broken branches until it revealed something underneath, an old, weathered wooden door that had fallen from its hinges. "Daddy, look!" Lily exclaimed. "Buddy is helping." Jacob approached cautiously. The door was perfect, flat, sturdy enough to support Michael's weight, yet light enough that Jacob could manage one end while a wild bear apparently managed the other. "Thank you," Jacob said softly to the animal, feeling slightly foolish for talking to it like a person, yet somehow certain that it understood. The bear huffed again and used its powerful jaws to drag the door closer to the cabin entrance. Jacob took this opportunity to examine it more carefully. There was something unusual about this bear beyond its helpful behavior. Its eyes held a depth and awareness that was distinctly unanimal-like. And now that Jacob looked more carefully, he noticed a thin scar running from the bear's right eye down to its jaw, almost like a human surgical scar. "Daddy, Buddy has a special mark," Lily said, noticing her father's gaze. "He told me it's from when the people helped him." Jacob froze. "What do you mean, honey?" "What people?" Lily shrugged with the casual acceptance of a child. "The people in white coats. He said they were nice but scary. They made his head better after he got hurt." A chill ran down Jacob's spine. What his daughter was describing sounded disturbingly like some kind of research facility. Could this bear be the subject of scientific experiments? It would explain the unusual intelligence, the almost human-like behavior. And the scar, brain surgery? The bear was watching him intently now, as if aware of Jacob's sudden suspicion. Its eyes seemed to plead for trust. A weak call from inside the cabin snapped Jacob back to the urgent matter at hand. Questions about the bear's origins would have to wait. "Let's get this ready," he said, pulling off his hunting jacket and laying it across the wooden door along with his extra shirt from his backpack. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide some cushioning for Michael's journey. Working together, Jacob and the bear, he found himself mentally using the name Buddy now, positioned the makeshift stretcher just outside the cabin door. Jacob went back inside to prepare Michael for transport. "I've made a sort of stretcher," he explained, helping the injured man sit up slightly. "It's not perfect, but it should get you back to our campsite." Michael nodded weakly, his face pale and drawn with pain. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't think anyone would find me." "Well, you have Buddy to thank for that," Jacob said with a small smile. The bear, he added, seeing Michael's confusion. My daughter named him. The bear, Michael repeated, his voice suddenly sharper despite his weakness. You don't understand about the bear. Jacob paused in the act of wrapping an additional blanket around Michael's shoulders. What do you mean? Michael's eyes darted nervously to the door. I wasn't just hiking, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I work for biosynthetic research. We have a facility about 10 miles north of here. Jacob felt his blood run cold. What kind of facility? Advanced animal cognition studies, Michael said, wincing as he shifted position. We were working with several species, including bears, implementing neural implants to enhance cognitive function, communication capabilities. You're telling me, Jacob struggled to process what he was hearing. That bear out there is some kind of experiment? Michael nodded weakly. Subject 47B, most advanced subject in the program. The implants not only increased intelligence but seemed to affect emotional development. Empathy, he formed strong bonds with his handlers. He paused, coughing painfully. 6 weeks ago there was an accident, a fire in the East Wing. Several containment systems failed. Subject 47B escaped in the chaos. Jacob remembered now. There had been news reports about a fire at a research facility in the mountains, though the nature of the research had been vaguely described as wildlife studies. The public had been warned about potentially dangerous animals in the area, but assured that recapture teams were handling the situation. You're here looking for him, Jacob said, the pieces falling into place. Michael nodded. Tracking device in his implant. But I lost my equipment in the fall, and then he found me. His voice trailed off in wonder. He recognized my scent from the lab. Instead of attacking, he tried to help, brought me food, water. I couldn't believe it. Outside, Lily's laughter floated through the door as she apparently played some game with the bear. Jacob felt a surge of protective fear, followed by confusion. If what Michael was saying was true, the bear was no ordinary animal. But was it dangerous? It had opportunities to harm Lily and hadn't taken them. Instead, it had sought human help for Michael. Is he dangerous? Jacob asked directly. Michael's expression was troubled. Not intentionally, but the implants, they're experimental. We don't fully understand all the effects. There have been instances of unpredictable behavior, mood swings, and his strength. He could hurt someone without meaning to. A new worry gnawed at Jacob. If you're here tracking him, are others looking too? Michael's eyes darted away, confirming Jacob's suspicion before he spoke. Recovery teams, armed. They have orders to recapture if possible, but Subject 47B is valuable intellectual property. The company won't risk losing him even if that means killing him, Jacob finished grimly. Michael nodded miserably. I volunteered to track him alone first. I thought I could bring him back safely. He trusts me. Or he did, before. He gestured to his broken leg. Jacob sat back on his heels, mind racing. What had started as a simple rescue had suddenly become much more complicated. They needed to get Michael medical attention, but in doing so they might be leading the recovery teams right to the bear, to Buddy, as Lily called him. And yet, could he in good conscience help an animal, even an unusually intelligent one, evade capture if it might be unstable or dangerous? What about his responsibility to his daughter's safety? Daddy? Lily's voice called from outside. Buddy says more people are coming. Jacob rushed to the door. Lily stood beside the bear, who was now alert, ears pricked forward, nose testing the air. A low growl rumbled in its throat. the first aggressive sound Jacob had heard it make. "What do you mean, honey?" Jacob asked, straining to hear anything in the quiet forest. "He can hear them," Lily said simply. "People with guns, like the ones who chased him before." Jacob looked at the bear, at Buddy, and saw fear in those intelligent eyes. Not aggression, but fear. And something else. Trust. This powerful creature was looking to him for protection. "We need to move now," Jacob decided, turning back to Michael. "Can you help me get you onto the stretcher?" With considerable effort and pain on Michael's part, they managed to get him positioned on the makeshift stretcher. Jacob pulled the blanket securely around him, both for warmth and to prevent him from sliding off during transport. "Lily, I need you to walk in front of us with the flashlight," Jacob instructed, handing her the light. "Stay on the path that Buddy shows us, okay?" The little girl nodded solemnly, taking her responsibility seriously. "Which way, Buddy?" she asked the bear. To Jacob's continuing amazement, the animal seemed to understand. It moved to the edge of the clearing, opposite from where they had entered, looking back expectantly. "Not the way we came," Jacob noted, speaking to Michael. "Is he trying to avoid the recovery teams?" Michael nodded weakly. "He's smart. Very smart. Knows these woods better than any human now." Jacob took one end of the stretcher while the bear, in a display of dexterity that defied belief, carefully gripped the other end with its teeth and powerful forearms. Together they lifted Michael, who groaned despite his best efforts to remain quiet. They moved into the forest, following a barely visible game trail. Lily walked ahead, the flashlight beam bouncing with her small steps, occasionally looking back to make sure everyone was keeping up. The bear moved with surprising grace, adjusting its pace to match Jacob's and taking care not to jostle the stretcher. They had been traveling for perhaps 15 minutes when the bear suddenly stopped, its head raised alertly. A low, warning growl vibrated through its massive body. "What is it?" Jacob whispered, carefully setting down his end of the stretcher. In answer, a faint sound reached his ears, voices still distant but drawing closer. And then another sound that made his blood run cold, the baying of dogs. "They're using tracking hounds," Michael whispered, his face contorted with pain and fear. "They'll find us." The bear made a soft huffing noise, looking intently at Jacob before glancing toward a dense thicket of bushes nearby. It repeated the motion several times. "I think he wants us to hide," Lily said, interpreting the animal's behavior. Jacob considered their options quickly. They couldn't outrun the search party, not with Michael injured, and he wasn't about to abandon the man despite the complicated situation. "Over there," he decided, pointing to the thicket. "We'll conceal ourselves and wait for them to pass." With as much speed as they could manage, they moved Michael into the center of the thick undergrowth. The branches and leaves closed around them, providing surprisingly good concealment in the darkness. Jacob pulled Lily close to his side, switching off the flashlight to avoid detection. The bear, however, didn't join them. Instead, it looked at Jacob with what seemed like resolve, then deliberately picked up a broken branch in its mouth. "What is he doing?" Jacob whispered. Michael's eyes widened with understanding. "Creating a false trail," he said softly. "He's going to lead them away from us." Before Jacob could respond, the bear began dragging the branch across the ground, moving away from their hiding place. It was systematically obliterating their tracks and creating new ones leading in another direction. "He's protecting us," Lily whispered in awe. "Buddy is so smart." The voices grew louder, and flashlight beams cut through the darkness about 100 yards away. Jacob could make out fragments of conversation, signals coming from this direction. "Thermal imaging shows recent activity. Orders are to trank on sight, lethal force only if necessary. The bear finished creating the false trail and looked back at their hiding place one last time. Even in the darkness, Jacob could swear he saw something like goodbye in those two human eyes. Then the animal deliberately moved into an open space where the moonlight illuminated its massive form clearly. A shout went up from the search party. Visual confirmation. Subject 47. B sighted. The bear bolted, crashing through the underbrush with enough noise to wake the entire forest, drawing the search team away from where Jacob, Lily, and Michael hid. "No," Michael whispered desperately. "They'll hurt him." Jacob felt torn. The bear, Buddy, had saved Michael's life and was now sacrificing itself to protect them all. Yet Jacob had Lily to think about. He couldn't risk his daughter's safety, no matter how extraordinary the circumstances. As the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, Jacob made a decision that surprised even himself. "Lily, stay here with Michael," he instructed, his voice firm. "Don't move, don't make a sound. I'll be back as soon as I can." "Where are you going, Daddy?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with worry. Jacob checked his hunting knife and took a deep breath. "I'm going to help Buddy." Michael grabbed Jacob's wrist with surprising strength for someone so weakened. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk yourself for an animal?" Jacob looked in the direction where the bear had disappeared, pursued by armed men with tranquilizer guns and who knew what else. "Because he's not just an animal," he said quietly, "and I don't think you believe he is either. Otherwise you wouldn't have been trying to find him alone." Michael's hand fell away, and something like relief crossed his face. "Be careful," he whispered. "The recovery team, they don't care about anything except retrieving company property." Jacob nodded grimly, then slipped out of the thicket and into the night, following the sounds of pursuit. Behind him, Lily whispered, "Save Buddy, Daddy. Please." The forest seemed to close around Jacob as he moved swiftly but silently through the underbrush, years of hunting experience guiding his steps. The sounds ahead grew louder, men shouting to each other, dogs baying, and the crash of a large animal moving at speed through the woods. A plan formed in Jacob's mind. He couldn't overpower the recovery team, but perhaps he could create enough confusion to give Buddy a chance to escape deeper into the wilderness. It was a risk, but something deep inside him couldn't stand by while the intelligent creature was captured or worse. As he ran, Jacob couldn't help but reflect on how quickly his worldview had been upended. This morning, he had been a simple man taking his daughter for a hike in familiar woods. Now he was rushing to aid an experimentally enhanced bear against a corporate recovery team, leaving his child with an injured scientist in the middle of a dark forest. Life, Jacob thought grimly, had a way of complicating itself when you least expected it. Ahead, a sharp cry of pain cut through the night, not human, but ursine. Jacob's heart sank. They had hurt Buddy. Without conscious thought, he increased his pace, determination fueling his tired muscles. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. Nothing about these woods would ever seem the same to him again, and neither, perhaps, would his understanding of the line between human and animal, or of the responsibilities that came with higher intelligence, whether natural or artificially enhanced. The sounds of struggle grew louder. Jacob Bennett, ordinary man and father, took a deep breath and plunged toward the confrontation, uncertain of what he would do when he got there, but knowing he couldn't do nothing. Sometimes, he reflected, courage wasn't about having a plan. Sometimes it was simply about showing up when it mattered. And somehow, in this strangest of nights, it mattered very much what happened to a bear called Buddy. The scene that greeted Jacob as he crested a small rise made his stomach clench with anger and fear. In a moonlit clearing ahead, Buddy was surrounded by 5 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by night vision goggles. 2 of them held leashed dogs straining against their collars, while the others pointed what looked like specialized tranquilizer rifles at the bear. Buddy was backed against a large boulder, blood matting the fur on his left shoulder where a dart protruded. Despite the sedative undoubtedly coursing through his system, the bear remained upright, swaying slightly but still alert. His intelligent eyes darted between his pursuers, calculating, assessing. Jacob could see the animal was looking for an escape route, but the men had positioned themselves strategically to cut off all avenues of retreat. "Second dose ready," one of the men called out, his voice clinical and detached. "Control says maximum sedation. They don't want any more damage to the subject." "Copy that," another replied, raising his rifle, firing in 3, 2. Without fully thinking through his actions, Jacob stepped out of the tree line and into the clearing. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the night air. All 5 men swung toward him, weapons redirecting in his direction with practiced precision. The dogs growled, pulling at their leashes. "Civilian?" one of the men barked. "Sir, this is a restricted area. You need to leave immediately." Jacob raised his hand slowly, trying to project a calmness he didn't feel. "I'm just a hiker," he said, taking a careful step forward. "I heard the commotion. What's going on here?" The apparent leader of the group lowered his weapon slightly. "Wildlife management operation. Nothing to concern yourself with. Please return to the marked trails. This area isn't safe." Behind the men, Buddy's eyes fixed on Jacob. There was recognition there, and something else, a desperate plea. The bear was fighting the sedative, but Jacob could see his movements becoming more sluggish by the second. "That doesn't look like any wildlife management I've ever seen," Jacob said, deliberately taking another step into the clearing. He needed to keep their attention on him, away from Buddy. "Since when does wildlife management involve tactical gear and military-grade tranquilizers?" The men exchanged glances, their body language growing more tense. "Sir, I won't ask again," the leader said, his voice hardening. "This is a dangerous animal, an escaped research subject. For your own safety, leave the area now." "Research subject?" Jacob feigned surprise, buying time as he noticed Buddy beginning to move slowly, almost imperceptibly toward the gap created when the men had turned to face Jacob. "You mean that bear is from biosynthetic research, the facility that had the fire?" His mention of the company name caused a visible reaction among the men. The leader took a step toward Jacob, his posture now openly threatening. "How do you know about that?" he demanded. "That information is classified. Identify yourself." Jacob's mind raced. He needed a distraction, something dramatic enough to give Buddy the few seconds he needed to escape into the dense forest behind him. An idea struck, risky, potentially dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "My name is Jacob Bennett," he said clearly, reaching slowly for his back pocket. "I'm a journalist with the Washington Post." It was a complete lie, but it had the desired effect. The men stiffened, and the leader raised a hand to his ear, apparently activating a communication device. "Control, we have a situation. Civilian claims to be press, aware of the facility and subject." While attention focused on him, Jacob completed his movement, pulling not press credentials but his hunting knife from his back pocket. In one fluid motion he flung it toward the tree line, away from both Buddy and the recovery team, where it struck a tree trunk with a loud thwack. The effect was immediate. The men spun toward the sound. The dogs lunged and barked frantically, and in that moment of confusion, Buddy made his move. With a burst of speed impressive for an animal fighting sedation, The bear bolted for the gap in the human perimeter, crashing into the undergrowth beyond. "The subject is mobile," one of the men shouted, "moving southwest." Two of the men immediately took off in pursuit, the dogs pulling their handlers in the same direction. The leader and one remaining man kept their weapons trained on Jacob. "That was a mistake," the leader said coldly. "You just interfered with a high-security corporate operation. You have no idea what you've done." Jacob stood his ground, heart hammering in his chest. "I think I just prevented the exploitation of an intelligent creature," he replied. "That bear saved a man's life tonight. He deserves better than being treated like property." The leader tilted his head slightly. "Saved a life? What are you talking about?" Thinking quickly, Jacob decided that partial truth might serve him better than complete lies. "There's an injured hiker back that way," he said, gesturing vaguely in a direction that wasn't actually where Lily and Michael waited. "Broken leg, been stranded for days. Your subject found him and then found me and my daughter, led us to the man. He's been keeping him alive, bringing him food and water." The second man lowered his weapon slightly, looking uncertainly at his leader. "Sir, that matches Doctor Hayes's tracking pattern before we lost his signal." The subject was staying in one location for extended periods. A look of surprise crossed the leader's face, visible even behind his tactical gear. "Hayes is alive? We thought he'd been injured or killed during tracking." "Very much alive," Jacob confirmed, "though he needs immediate medical attention." The leader was silent for a long moment, apparently processing this information and weighing his options. Finally, he touched his earpiece again. "Control. Possible location on Dr. Hayes. Injured, requiring medical evacuation." He paused, listening to a response Jacob couldn't hear. "Understood. We'll secure the civilian and proceed to extraction point." Jacob didn't like the sound of "secure the civilian," but before he could react, the leader lowered his weapon completely. "Mr. Bennett, the recovery of our subject is priority 1, but Dr. Hayes is a valuable team member. Take us to him, and we'll ensure he receives medical care. In return, I'm authorized to offer you a substantial non-disclosure agreement." "And if I refuse?" Jacob asked, though he already knew the answer. The leader's voice was flat. "There are many dangers in these woods at night. Hikers go missing all the time." The threat was clear. Jacob nodded slowly. "I'll take you to the injured man. But my daughter is with him. She's only 4. I want your word she won't be harmed or frightened." "Children are not our concern," the leader said dismissively. "Lead the way." Jacob turned and began walking, deliberately setting a pace that would give Buddy more time to escape, and taking a circuitous route that he hoped would further confuse the pursuit. His mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. He had bought the bear some time, but at what cost? Now he was leading potentially dangerous men to his daughter, and he had no guarantee they would simply provide medical care and leave. As they walked, Jacob decided to try and gather more information. "So, neural implants in bears," he said conversationally. "Sounds like something from a science fiction movie." The leader didn't respond, but the other man, younger, possibly less experienced, spoke up. "It's revolutionary technology. The subject you saw represents years of advancement in interspecies neural mapping. The implications for human medicine alone are staggering." "Enough," the leader cut in sharply. "Mr. Bennett doesn't need a science lesson." "Just trying to understand," Jacob said mildly. "The bear, your subject, he seemed almost human in his understanding. Empathetic. Is that part of the enhancement?" The younger man started to respond but was silenced by a harsh look from his leader. They continued intense silence for several minutes before the leader spoke again. "The subject is valuable intellectual property, Mr. Bennett. Nothing more. Any perceived humanity is simply anthropomorphic projection, a common fallacy when observing animal behavior." Jacob thought about Buddy's deliberate actions: finding Lily, leading them to Michael, bringing food and water to the injured man, and finally creating a false trail to protect them. That wasn't anthropomorphic projection. That was genuine intelligence and empathy. "If you say so," he replied neutrally, not wanting to antagonize the man further. They walked for nearly half an hour, Jacob deliberately taking wrong turns and backtracking, claiming confusion in the darkness. The leader grew increasingly impatient, but Jacob maintained the pretense of being lost, all while leading them further from where he had actually left Lily and Michael. Finally, the leader stopped abruptly. "Enough games, Mr. Bennett. You're deliberately misleading us." Before Jacob could respond, the man's radio crackled to life. "Recovery Team Alpha, this is Control. Subject 47B signal has gone static. Coordinates indicate position approximately 2 kilometers northeast of your current location." The leader's posture changed immediately. "Copy, Control, moving to intercept." He turned to Jacob, his voice cold. "Change of plans. You're coming with us to retrieve our subject. Then you'll take us to Dr. Hayes and your daughter." Jacob's heart sank. Buddy must have succumbed to the tranquilizers. He was vulnerable now, unable to evade capture. "I need to get back to my daughter," Jacob insisted. "She's alone with an injured man in the wilderness." "You should have thought of that before interfering with our operation," the leader replied without sympathy. "Move." With no real choice, Jacob found himself being marched through the forest in the direction indicated by their tracking system. The night had grown colder, and his concern for Lily intensified with every step away from where he had left her. Yet he was also deeply worried about Buddy. The bear had shown more humanity than the men currently holding him at gunpoint. After 20 minutes of brisk hiking, they reached another small clearing. In the center, illuminated by moonlight, lay Buddy's massive form, motionless on the forest floor. The 2 men who had pursued him stood guard, rifles ready. "Subject secure," one reported. "Multiple doses administered. Complete sedation achieved." Jacob felt a wave of sadness wash over him as he looked at the magnificent creature, now helpless and vulnerable. The dart still protruded from his shoulder, and several more were visible in his flank. His chest rose and fell slowly, indicating he was still alive, but completely incapacitated. "Prepare for transport," the leader ordered. "Control is sending the extraction vehicle to the nearest access road. We'll need to move the subject approximately 1 kilometer east." The men began unpacking equipment from their tactical vests, collapsible poles, and heavy-duty canvas that Jacob realized would form a carrying sling for the bear. Despite their clinical detachment, he could see they respected the animal's raw power even in its sedated state. They worked methodically, their movements practiced and efficient. As they positioned the sling beside Buddy, Jacob noticed something odd. The bear's eyes were closed, but there was a slight twitch to his ear, almost imperceptible, but definitely intentional. With a jolt of realization, Jacob understood. Buddy wasn't fully sedated. He was faking, or at least exaggerating, the effects of the tranquilizers. The implications raced through Jacob's mind. If Buddy was still conscious, he might attempt to escape again when moved. That could create another opportunity for Jacob to get away and return to Lily and Michael, but it could also result in the recovery team using lethal force if they felt threatened. Jacob needed to warn Buddy somehow, to communicate that he should wait for a better moment. But how do you secretly signal to a bear while surrounded by armed men? An idea struck him. "I need to use the bathroom," he announced abruptly. The leader gave him a suspicious look. "Hold it." "It's been hours," Jacob insisted. "Unless you want me to go right here?" After a moment of consideration, the leader nodded to the younger man. "Watch him. 2 minutes." Jacob was escorted to the edge of the clearing, just within sight of the others, but partially concealed by bushes. As he pretended to relieve himself, he whispered urgently, hoping against hope that Buddy's enhanced hearing would pick up his words. "Buddy, if you can hear me, don't move yet. Too dangerous. Wait for better chance." The young guard shifted impatiently. "Hurry up." Jacob zipped his pants and returned to the clearing, scanning Buddy's form for any sign that his message had been received. There was nothing obvious, but the ear twitch had stopped. Whether that meant anything, Jacob couldn't be sure. The team had finished preparing the transport sling and now positioned themselves around Buddy's massive body. "On my count," the leader instructed. 1, 2, 3, lift." The 4 men strained with the weight as they raised the bear off the ground. Buddy hung limply in the sling, giving no indication of consciousness. They began moving eastward, 2 men on each side of the sling, while the leader walked behind Jacob, keeping him at gunpoint. "What happens to him now?" Jacob asked, nodding toward Buddy. "That's classified," the leader replied curtly. "More experiments?" Jacob pressed. "More neural implants?" The leader didn't respond immediately, but the younger man at the front of the sling spoke up. "The next phase involves deeper integration of the neural mesh. The subject's cognitive capabilities have exceeded all projections. With expanded connections to the language processing centers, we might achieve rudimentary verbal communication." "Silence!" the leader barked, but the damage was done. Jacob felt sick. They weren't just studying Buddy's enhanced intelligence. They were planning to push it further, to turn him into some kind of talking bear, a circus freak for scientific glory. "He's not a lab rat," Jacob said quietly. "He's a thinking, feeling being. What you're doing is wrong." "Your moral objections are noted," the leader said dryly. "And irrelevant." They continued in tense silence for several minutes, the only sounds being the men's labored breathing as they carried Buddy's considerable weight and the occasional call of night birds in the forest canopy. Jacob's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. He needed to help Buddy escape, get back to Lily and Michael, and somehow avoid being silenced by the recovery team. It seemed an impossible task. The forest began to thin as they approached what Jacob assumed was the access road mentioned earlier. Through the trees, he could see the faint glow of headlights. The extraction vehicle had arrived. It was now or never. If Buddy reached that vehicle, he would disappear into Biosynthetic Research's facility, perhaps never to experience freedom again. Jacob had to act, even if the odds were stacked against him. Fortune, however, had other ideas. As they neared the edge of the forest, a new sound reached their ears, the unmistakable whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotors. The sound grew rapidly louder, and powerful searchlights suddenly flooded the area with harsh white light. The recovery team stopped, looking up in confusion. The leader activated his radio. "Control. Is the aerial unit part of extraction protocol? Over." The response was apparently negative, because the leader's posture instantly changed to alert wariness. "Unknown aircraft," he reported tensely. "Possibly Forest Service or park rangers. Everyone, cover the subject. Standard civilian encounter protocols." The helicopter circled once overhead, its searchlight sweeping the area, before hovering directly above them. A loudspeaker crackled to life. Attention, Biosynthetic Research Recovery Team. This is Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Connor Adams. You are in violation of multiple federal wildlife protection statutes. Put down your weapons and step away from the animal. You are surrounded. Jacob's jaw dropped in shock. The FBI. How had they become involved? The recovery team members exchanged panicked glances. The leader, however, remained composed. "Stay calm," he instructed his men. "Control will handle this. Continue with extraction as planned." The loudspeaker blared again. "This is your final warning. Put down your weapons now." The leader raised his rifle, not toward the helicopter, but toward Jacob. "Mr. Bennett, I suggest you tell your FBI friends that if they interfere further, we'll have a civilian casualty on our hands." Before Jacob could respond, several things happened simultaneously. From the surrounding forest, multiple figures in FBI tactical gear emerged, weapons trained on the recovery team. The helicopter's searchlight focused directly on the leader, momentarily blinding him. And most surprisingly, Buddy's eyes snapped fully open. With a speed that seemed impossible for an animal his size, especially one supposedly sedated, Buddy burst out of the sling, sending the four men carrying him sprawling to the ground. He rose to his full height, towering over everyone present, and let out a deafening roar that echoed through the night. Chaos erupted. The recovery team scrambled for their weapons. FBI agents shouted commands. The helicopter's searchlight swung wildly across the scene. In the confusion, Jacob felt a powerful paw close around his arm. Not with crushing force, but with deliberate, controlled strength. Buddy was pulling him away from the leader, who was still trying to clear his vision after the searchlight's glare. Without hesitation, Jacob allowed himself to be led into the darkness of the forest, away from the confrontation. Behind them, he could hear shouting, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, the crackle of radios. But no gunfire. The FBI team was apparently managing to subdue the recovery team without lethal force. Once they were safely hidden in the trees, Buddy released Jacob's arm and looked at him intently. There was unmistakable gratitude in those intelligent eyes, but also urgency. The bear huffed softly, then turned and began moving rapidly through the forest, looking back to ensure Jacob was following. "Lily and Michael," Jacob said, understanding immediately. "You remember where they are?" Buddy huffed again in what seemed like confirmation, increasing his pace. Despite the tranquilizer darts that still protruded from his hide, which he apparently had built up some resistance to, perhaps from previous experiences at the research facility, the bear moved with purpose and energy. Jacob followed, his mind reeling from the sudden appearance of the FBI. How had they known? Who had alerted them to Biosynthetic Research's activities? As if reading his thoughts, Buddy slowed momentarily and looked back at Jacob with what could only be described as a knowing expression. The bear raised a paw to his head, touching the area near his ear where Jacob had noticed the surgical scar earlier. The implant, Jacob realized aloud, it has a tracking device, but someone else was monitoring it besides Biosynthetic Research. Buddy made a soft grunting sound that Jacob interpreted as agreement. The implications were staggering. Had someone within the company alerted authorities, or had government agencies been monitoring the company's research all along? Those questions would have to wait. Their immediate priority was reaching Lily and Michael. Jacob checked his watch. He had been gone for over an hour. His daughter must be terrified, alone in the dark forest, with only an injured man for company. Buddy led them unerringly through the night, taking paths that seemed invisible to human eyes but clearly made sense to his enhanced cognition. They moved much faster than Jacob could have on his own, and within 20 minutes they approached the thicket where he had left Lily and Michael. "Lily," Jacob called softly as they neared the hiding place. "Lily, "It's Daddy." Silence greeted him. Jacob's heart raced with sudden fear. "Lily," he called more urgently, pushing through the undergrowth to where he had left them. The space was empty. Michael and Lily were gone. Panic threatened to overwhelm him until Buddy nudged his arm gently, then pointed his snout toward the ground. Jacob directed his flashlight beam downward and saw small footprints in the soft earth, Lily's sneakers, alongside drag marks that suggested Michael had been moved. "They relocated," Jacob said, relief flooding through him. "But why?" Buddy sniffed the air, then the ground, his enhanced senses gathering information Jacob could only guess at. The bear's head rose sharply, and he let out a soft whine, looking in a specific direction with evident concern. "You can track them?" Jacob asked. Buddy was already moving, following what must be Lily and Michael's scent trail. Jacob hurried after him, trying not to imagine what might have prompted them to leave the relative safety of their hiding place. Had Michael's condition worsened? Had they been discovered by another recovery team? The trail led deeper into the forest, away from both the cabin and the direction of the confrontation with the recovery team. After several minutes of tracking, Buddy suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward, listening intently. Jacob strained his own ears but heard nothing. Then, faintly, a sound reached him. A child's voice. Lily's voice. "Daddy will come back, Mr. Michael," he promised, "and Buddy will help him." Jacob broke into a run, pushing through the undergrowth with Buddy right beside him. They emerged into a small natural hollow formed by the massive roots of an ancient fallen tree, creating a sheltered space that was nearly invisible unless you stood directly beside it. There, huddled under Jacob's spare emergency blanket from his backpack, sat Lily beside Michael. The injured man looked worse, his face pale and drawn with pain, but he had one arm protectively around the little girl's shoulders. "Lily," Jacob called, his voice breaking with relief. "Daddy!" Lily scrambled out from under the blanket and threw herself into her father's arms. "You found us, and you brought Buddy back too." Jacob hugged his daughter tightly, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. "Why did you move? I told you to stay hidden." Michael coughed weakly. "More recovery teams," he explained, his voice barely audible. "Different direction. We heard them talking, looking for your daughter, saying she could identify the subject. Lily heard them first, warned me, had to move." A chill ran down Jacob's spine. Biosynthetic research had been willing to target a child to protect their secret. His decision to help Buddy had been even more justified than he'd realized. "It's okay now," Jacob reassured them both. "The FBI is here. They're rounding up the recovery teams." Michael's eyebrows rose in surprise. "FBI? How?" Jacob glanced at Buddy, who had moved to Lily's side and was allowing the little girl to hug his massive neck. "I think someone's been monitoring biosynthetic research's activities, maybe tracking Buddy's implant too." "Project Wilderness," Michael murmured, his eyes growing unfocused. There were rumors, a government oversight committee, secret investigations. Before Jacob could ask for clarification, the sound of approaching footsteps reached them. Buddy's head swung toward the noise, his posture immediately alert but not aggressive. A voice called out, "Jacob Bennett? Lily Bennett? This is FBI Special Agent Connor Adams. If you can hear me, please respond." Jacob hesitated only momentarily before answering. "We're here. We have an injured man who needs immediate medical attention." Within seconds, figures appeared at the edge of the hollow, men and women in FBI tactical gear, but with their weapons lowered. One of them, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a confident bearing, stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Special Agent Adams. We've been monitoring the situation. Are you and your daughter unharmed?" Jacob nodded, keeping his arm around Lily. "We're fine, but Dr. Hayes needs urgent care." Two agents immediately moved to Michael's side, one of them speaking into a radio to request medical evacuation. Special Agent Adams approached Buddy cautiously, his expression a mixture of awe and professional assessment. "Subject 47B," he said quietly. "You've led us on quite a chase." To everyone's surprise, Buddy sat back on his haunches and raised a paw in what looked remarkably like a greeting gesture. Agent Adams actually smiled. "Dr. Haley Dawson said you'd understand every word," he commented before turning to Jacob. "Mr. Bennett, I need to ask you and your daughter some questions, but first, let's get everyone to safety. We have a medical helicopter landing in a clearing about half a mile from here. Can you walk that far?" "We'll manage," Jacob assured him. "But what about Buddy? I mean, Subject 47B. Agent Adams glanced at the bear, who was now allowing Lily to examine the tranquilizer darts still embedded in his hide. One of the medical agents carefully removed them, earning a grateful huff from Buddy. "That's complicated," Adams admitted. "Officially, we're here investigating biosynthetic research for illegal wildlife experimentation and corporate espionage. Subject 47B is evidence." "He's not just evidence," Jacob said firmly. "He's intelligent, self-aware. You can't just treat him like a thing." Adams raised a placating hand. "I agree, Mr. Bennett, which is why we have Dr. Dawson with us. She's the leading expert on enhanced cognition in wildlife. She's been working undercover at Biosynthetic for 2 years, documenting their activities and advocating for Subject 47B's welfare." "Dr. Dawson," Michael whispered from where he lay, "the new neurologist, always asking questions about ethical protocols." Adams nodded. Her real assignment was monitoring the company's compliance with restricted research guidelines. When she discovered the extent of the neural implant program and its effects, she contacted us. We've been building a case for months. "So, what happens to Buddy now?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the adult conversation with the directness only a child could manage. Adams knelt to her level, his expression softening. "That's a good question, young lady, and the truth is, we don't know yet. Subject 47B-Buddy- is unique. There's no protocol for handling an animal with his level of enhanced intelligence." Buddy made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and looked at Jacob with what seemed like resignation. Jacob felt a surge of protectiveness toward this creature who had saved Michael's life and protected his daughter. "He deserves freedom," Jacob said firmly. "A sanctuary, at least, not a laboratory." "I agree," Adams said, surprising him. "So does Dr. Dawson, but there are complications. The implants require monitoring and maintenance, and there are security concerns. Other organizations might target him for the technology in his brain." As they spoke, the medical agents had fashioned a proper stretcher for Michael and were preparing to move him. Lily kept close to Buddy, her small hand buried in his thick fur. "Can we go now, please?" she asked. "Buddy is tired, and Mr. Michael needs a doctor." Adams smiled at her practical assessment. "You're absolutely right. Let's move out. We can continue this discussion once everyone is safe." Together, they made their way through the forest toward the extraction point. Jacob carried Lily part of the way when she grew too tired to walk, while Buddy stayed close beside them, occasionally looking back as if checking for pursuers, despite the FBI agents flanking their small group. The medical helicopter waited in a moonlit clearing, its rotors spinning lazily, maintaining readiness for immediate departure. Medical personnel rushed forward with a gurney for Michael, transferring him expertly from the stretcher and immediately beginning emergency care. "We'll transport Dr. Hayes directly to Mercy General in Portland," an agent informed Jacob. "There's a second helicopter coming for you and your daughter." "What about Buddy?" Lily asked anxiously, still holding on to the bear's fur. Her question was answered by the arrival of a woman in a standard FBI jacket over civilian clothes. Her intelligent eyes immediately focused on Buddy, who perked up visibly at her appearance. "Subject 47B," she said warmly, approaching without fear and placing a gentle hand on the bear's massive head. "I've been so worried about you." "Dr. Dawson, I presume?" Jacob asked. She nodded, extending her free hand. "Dr. Haley Dawson, and you must be the famous Jacob Bennett, the man who interfered with a multi-million-dollar corporate recovery operation to save a bear." "He saved us first," Jacob replied simply. Dawson smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "That sounds like him." The empathy component of the neural enhancement took in ways none of the researchers anticipated. He formed attachments to his handlers, myself included. "What will happen to him?" Jacob asked again, watching as Lily whispered something in Buddy's ear that made the bear huff softly. Dr. Dawson's expression grew serious. "That's what I want to discuss with you, Mr. Bennett. I have a proposition that might sound unusual, but given the circumstances, it might be our best option." Before she could continue, the sound of another helicopter approaching interrupted their conversation. Agent Adams returned to their side. "Second transport is here. Mr. Bennett, you and your daughter will be flown to Portland, where you'll need to give formal statements. Dr. Dawson, Subject 47B's transport will arrive within the hour." Lily looked up in alarm. "No, Buddy has to come with us. He'll be scared alone." Dr. Dawson knelt beside the little girl. "He won't be alone, Lily. I'll stay with him. I've been taking care of him for a long time. But the bad people might come back," Lily insisted, her lower lip trembling. "They want to hurt him and make him do tricks." The adults exchanged glances over her head. Her simple assessment wasn't far from the truth. "I promise you," Dr. Dawson said solemnly, "I won't let anyone hurt Buddy again. But right now, you need to go with your father and get some rest. You've been very brave tonight." Lily looked unconvinced, but allowed Jacob to lift her into his arms. "Can we visit Buddy later?" she asked drowsily, the night's events finally catching up with her. "Actually," Dr. Dawson said, looking directly at Jacob, "that's what I wanted to discuss with your father. A more permanent arrangement for everyone's benefit." "We'll talk tomorrow," Jacob agreed, intrigued despite his exhaustion. "After we've all had some rest." As they boarded the helicopter, Lily waved tiredly to Buddy, who raised his paw in that same human-like gesture Jacob had noticed earlier. The sight brought a lump to his throat, a wild animal that wasn't exactly wild anymore. A creature caught between worlds, just as Jacob now found himself caught between his simple former life and whatever complex future awaited after this extraordinary night. As the helicopter lifted off, Lily fell asleep against his chest, but Jacob remained awake, watching the forest shrink beneath them. Somewhere in that vast wilderness was a cabin where an injured man had been kept alive by a bear with an enhanced brain. Somewhere in those trees, the line between animal and human intelligence had blurred, raising questions Jacob had never thought to consider before. And somewhere ahead lay answers to what would happen to Buddy, to what Dr. Dawson's mysterious proposition might be, and to how a regular man and his daughter could possibly return to normal life after discovering that the world was far stranger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. The helicopter banked toward Portland, carrying them toward those answers and whatever remarkable future awaited. The sterile white corridor of Mercy General Hospital seemed a world away from the dark, wild forest of the previous night. Jacob sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside an examination room where doctors were checking Lily for any injuries or trauma, though she had insisted she was just tired and wanted to see Buddy. It had been nearly 12 hours since their rescue. After giving preliminary statements to FBI agents, Jacob and Lily had been allowed a few hours of sleep in a hotel room under protective custody. Now, they were being examined and debriefed more thoroughly while the FBI continued their investigation into biosynthetic research. Agent Adams approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Jacob, who accepted it gratefully. "How's she doing?" Adams asked, nodding toward the examination room. "Physically fine. Mentally ... Jacob shrugged. "She's 4. She thinks she made friends with a talking bear and had a grand adventure. The full impact hasn't hit her." Adams nodded thoughtfully. "Children are resilient, but she might have questions later as she processes what happened. And I'm not sure what answers I can give her," Jacob admitted. "I barely understand it myself." "Dr. Hayes is stable," Adams offered. "Out of surgery for his leg. The doctors say he wouldn't have survived another day in the woods without medical attention." "And the recovery teams?" "In custody. Biosynthetic research is claiming they were acting without corporate authorization, but we have evidence suggesting otherwise." Adams sipped his coffee. "Dr. Dawson's undercover work has been thorough." Jacob hesitated before asking the question that had been on his mind since the helicopter lifted off. "And Buddy? Subject 47B?" A small smile crossed Adams's face. "Currently enjoying a breakfast of salmon and honey at our secure wildlife facility. Dr. Dawson is with him." Relief flooded through Jacob. He hadn't realized how worried he'd been about the bear until that moment. "He saved our lives," he said quietly, "multiple times." "I know," Adams replied. "I've reviewed the statements. It's unprecedented. The level of cognition, the emotional intelligence, the problem-solving abilities. We've had animal cognition studies before, but nothing remotely approaching this. What will happen to him?" Adams looked like he was choosing his words carefully. "That's complicated. Legally speaking, Subject 47B is still classified as an experimental research asset. But ethically," he shook his head. "Dr. Dawson has been advocating for a new approach." Before Jacob could ask for clarification, the door to the examination room opened, and Lily came bounding out, followed by a doctor who gave Jacob a reassuring nod. "Daddy, the doctor says I'm super healthy," Lily announced proudly. "Can we see Buddy now?" Jacob exchanged glances with Agent Adams, who checked his watch. "Actually," the agent said, "Dr. Dawson asked if you both could join her this afternoon. She has something important to discuss with you." 3 hours later, Jacob and Lily followed Agent Adams through a security checkpoint at what had been described to them as a wildlife rehabilitation facility on the outskirts of Portland. The building looked more like a research center than an animal shelter, with modern architecture and extensive security measures. His future might help determine how we approach artificial intelligence, cognitive enhancement in humans, even how we define personhood. Jacob looked over at his daughter and Buddy. The bear was carefully turning the pages of the book with one claw when Lily indicated she was ready. His eyes focused on the colorful illustrations with evident interest. "I need time to think," he said finally. "Of course," Dawson agreed. "Take all the time you need." 2 months later, Jacob stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Beside the cabin, surrounded by 10 acres of enclosed forest, yet visible from where he stood, Buddy was teaching Lily how to find honey without disturbing the bees too much. The bear would point with his paw, then wait patiently while the little girl figured out what he meant. Still sure about this, Savannah Reed, formerly Savannah Bennett, asked as she joined him on the porch with her own coffee. His ex-wife had been skeptical when Jacob first explained the situation, thinking he might have suffered some trauma-induced delusion. It had taken meeting Buddy and seeing the bear's extraordinary intelligence firsthand to convince her. "Most of the time," Jacob replied honestly, "it's not exactly the life I planned." "She's happy," Savannah observed, watching their daughter laugh as Buddy carefully extracted honeycomb from a fallen log and offered her a small, clean piece. "And honestly, what kindergarten could compete with this education? Dr. Dawson's twice-weekly science lessons, Agent Adams's daughter coming for playdates, learning about nature firsthand." Jacob nodded. The sanctuary project had evolved rapidly once federal funding was secured. What had started as a proposal for a simple enclosure had grown into a groundbreaking research center focused on enhanced animal cognition, with Buddy as its centerpiece and willing participant. Dr. Michael Hayes had joined the project after his recovery, bringing his expertise in neural implant technology, but now devoted to maintaining Buddy's implants rather than advancing the technology further. His perspective had shifted dramatically after being saved by the very subject he had been tracking. "Dr. Dawson says they're making progress on the communication interface," Jacob mentioned. "She thinks within a year, Buddy might be able to express basic thoughts through the computer system." "And how do you feel about that?" Savannah asked perceptively. Jacob considered the question. Scared, excited, worried about the implications. "I wonder sometimes if we're moving too fast, if humanity is ready to have a real conversation with another species. I don't think we get to choose the timing of revolutionary changes," Savannah replied thoughtfully. "They happen, ready or not. The best we can do is try to guide them ethically." In the enclosure, Buddy was now showing Lily how to identify different types of mushrooms, carefully separating the edible from the poisonous varieties and making sure she understood not to touch the dangerous ones. His patience was remarkable. His methods of communication, pointing, demonstrating, using simple gestures they had developed together, increasingly sophisticated. "She asked me yesterday if Buddy has a soul," Jacob said quietly. "I didn't know how to answer." Savannah smiled. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that I think a soul is what makes someone care about others more than themselves. And by that definition, Buddy definitely has one." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter and the extraordinary creature who had changed their lives so profoundly. The sanctuary had become home not just for Buddy, but for a growing community of scientists, caretakers, and families who were part of what many now considered the most important interspecies communication project in human history. It wasn't the life Jacob had envisioned for himself or his daughter, but standing there in the morning sunlight, watching Lily learn and grow under the gentle guidance of a being that existed somewhere between animal and person, he couldn't imagine a more meaningful path. Agent Adams joined them, carrying a tablet with the latest security reports. "Perimeter's clear," he reported. "No unusual activity." Biosynthetic research had been shut down following the FBI investigation, its executives facing criminal charges for ethical violations and illegal experimentation. But there were other companies, other governments, that would be interested in the technology in Buddy's brain. Security remained a constant concern. "Are the school supplies ready for tomorrow?" Adams asked. Lily was part of a small group of children, mostly those of sanctuary staff, who attended classes in a purpose-built schoolhouse at the edge of the property. "All set," Savannah confirmed. "Mrs. Johnson has the science curriculum prepared, though I think today's practical lesson in honey harvesting might be hard to top." They shared a laugh, united in their commitment to creating something unprecedented. A community where humans and an enhanced animal could learn from each other, where boundaries were being redefined daily, and where a little girl could grow up understanding that intelligence and compassion came in many forms. Later that evening, as Jacob helped Lily prepare for bed in their cabin, she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Daddy, is Buddy happy here? Does he miss the big forest?" Jacob considered carefully before answering. "I think he misses parts of it. Freedom has a special kind of value that's hard to replace, but I also think he understands why he's here, and he's chosen to stay." Lily nodded, accepting this. "Dr. Dawson says his brain is special now, and he can't go back to being just a regular bear." "That's true," Jacob agreed. "Sometimes when things change, we can't go back to how they were before. We have to find a new way forward." "Like how we used to live in Bend, and now we live here with Buddy and the scientists?" Lily asked perceptively. "Exactly like that," Jacob smiled. "Changes can be scary, but they can also lead to amazing new experiences we never would have had otherwise." Lily was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think Buddy was lonely before," she finally said. "Even though he's super smart, other bears didn't understand him, and the people in the lab just wanted him to do tests. Now he has friends." Out of the mouths of babes, Jacob thought. His daughter had distilled the situation to its essence in a way that all the scientific papers and ethical debates had failed to capture. "I think you're right," he told her. "Everyone needs connection, even super smart bears." After Lily fell asleep, Jacob stepped outside onto the porch again. The sanctuary was quiet in the moonlight, but he could make out Buddy's form near the edge of the enclosure closest to their cabin. The bear was sitting peacefully, looking up at the stars. Jacob walked over to the fence. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. Buddy turned to regard him, those intelligent eyes reflecting the moonlight. He made a soft, huffing sound that Jacob had come to recognize as contentment. "Yeah, me neither. Too much on my mind." Jacob sat down on his side of the fence. "You know, I never thanked you properly for saving Michael, for finding Lily in the forest that day, for changing our lives." The bear tilted his head slightly, listening. "I don't know how much you understand," Jacob continued. "Dr. Dawson says your comprehension is far beyond what they can measure, but there are still limits. But I want you to know that what you did mattered. It changed things, not just for us, but maybe for how humans will think about intelligence and compassion for generations to come." Buddy extended a paw through a gap in the fence. Not fully, just enough that his claws rested lightly against the ground on Jacob's side. An offering, an acknowledgement. Jacob reached out slowly and placed his hand on the massive paw. They sat like that for a while, man and bear, connected across species by something that had no scientific name but felt a lot like friendship. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the unprecedented events unfolding beneath them. In that moment, Jacob understood something profound. The lines humans drew, between animal and person, between conscious and instinctual, between valuable and expendable, were far more arbitrary than he had ever realized. Buddy had crossed those lines, blurring them permanently, forcing a reconsideration of what it meant to be a thinking, feeling entity in this vast universe. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of this strange journey, the reminder that connection could transcend all boundaries, that compassion could bridge even the widest divides, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from the most unexpected teachers. A super-intelligent bear had led a little girl to a cabin in the woods to save a man's life, and in doing so had brought a profound truth into the light, that the capacity for kindness might just be the most important intelligence of all.